Hi everyone, very nice to be here on the spot. You've all had a full day, and I'm very impressed that you're all still here to hear what I have to say. A little bit about me, perhaps to start with. I worked for over 2 decades, closer to 3 decades, at the international level. A great deal of UN negotiations on international human rights, on climate change, on subjects relating to food and to biodiversity and to technology. And ultimately, I decided that the most important thing that I could do for the planet and for the people who inhabit it would be to come home and work on Canadian food policy. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. Because I believe that changing Canada's food system is actually critical to the well-being of the planet. I believe that our food system can be more healthy, it can be more fair, and it can be more sustainable. Because basically, although you may not realize it, sitting here at Concordia, and probably most people in the audience enjoying a good 3 meals a day, our food system is broken. And it's broken internationally, and it's broken here at home. Internationally, we have roughly 3.4 billion people who are either overfed or undernourished. For the first time last year, the number of obese people was larger than the number of hungry people on the planet. But these figures are alarming for Canada as well. 1 in 4 Canadians is obese, and 4 million Canadians live with some kind of food insecurity. So, just to take the international definition of food security, so we know what we're talking about, it exists when all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to maintain an active and healthy life. Yet, in Canada, 4 million people living with varying degrees of food insecurity, ranging from people who skip meals for an entire day, some regions of the country, for example, Nunavut in the north, where up to 70% of people live with extreme food insecurity because the cost of food is so high, and our government policies to improve food security in the north are so poor. To people who just buy the cheap calories rather than the healthy food that they should be eating. And increasingly, those who are food insecure are not people who are going through a temporary crisis in their lives. They're people who have jobs. They're students. They're people living ordinary lives who can no longer afford to eat in a healthy manner. So, a very serious problem in Canada, worsening problem in Canada, and an even more serious problem globally. If we look at the health side, just other aspects of how our food system is broken, steady increase in levels of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and other chronic diseases. These are diet-related diseases. They are related to us eating too much processed food, too much fat, salt, and sugar. They're related to a number of other things as well. I'm not saying it's the only thing. But the consequence of this on our public budgets is disastrous because our healthcare budgets are taking up more and more of our government spending. And places like universities and municipalities and all kinds of other priorities that governments should have can't be paid for because so much of our public dollars are going directly in the wrong place to deal with diet-related diseases that could have been prevented in the first place. And this takes place within a food system. These are not just isolated individual issues or questions of eating habits. This is a question of how we grow, process, transport, store, sell, and ultimately eat food. Everything from the farm to the fork, or from the sea to the fork, is involved in this. And what we see in Canada is a decline in the number of farms and an increase in the size of farms. It's very, very difficult now, if you are a young person who wants to go into farming, to find the financing that's going to enable you to do that. Farmers are massively subsidized to grow certain commodity crops and those who are trying to farm in a more biodiverse and sustainable way have a really uphill battle in even gaining access to a small amount of capital, even if their project can be completely sustainable. And there's some wonderful books. In fact, Jean-Martin Fortier is a Quebec author. His book has just been translated into English. And he explains how on a 1-acre farm, he's able to take care of his family and sell to community-supported agriculture directly to the consumers. So there are alternatives, but people are really facing an uphill battle to get there. And just as we see this in the farming sector, we see the same thing in the retail sector. A declining number of stores and an increasing surface. So more and more mega stores, big box stores, which offer an illusion of all kinds of diversity, but which in fact doesn't really exist, and which in fact are owned by a very small number of very large companies. So you end up with this situation where we have 55,000 farms in Canada that are forced to sell essentially to 4 different retailers, 4 or 5 different retailers. And then those 4 or 5 retailers, in fact, provide 80% of our food. So that's not a healthy situation. It doesn't give either the farmers or the consumers the bargaining power, the diversity that they would require for us to have a healthy economic system. This concentration also comes with tremendous risks that a very small number of companies control, for example, our meat supply. So that when there's a meat safety issue or a listeriosis outbreak, it's across the country that happens because nobody's buying the meat that's necessarily very close to them. Everything gets contaminated. And even more seriously, if we look at our seed supply, over half the world's seed supply is controlled by 3 companies, and their share is increasing all the time. 10 companies control over 75% of the world's seed supply. And those are proprietary seeds. Those are seeds that get sold to farmers every year. They're not the seeds that farmers have exchanged for millennia in order to foster an agricultural system that is biodiverse and that regenerates year after year after year. And in fact, there's new legislation being proposed in Canada right now, just undergone 2nd reading in the House of Commons, where we're going to consolidate that control and provide more opportunities for those companies to get an increased share of the profits at different levels of the chain. And then at the same time, as we have all this, actually the most exciting part of the market is the organic sector and the local and sustainable sector. More and more Canadians want to know who their farmer is, where their food is coming from, what pesticides, herbicides, fungicides are in it. They want to know this stuff. So the organic market has in fact tripled in size since 2006. That's where the economic dynamic sector is, and that's what our governments should be supporting. Others have talked about the issue of climate change and how it's related to our agricultural system. It's astonishing that we talk about climate change as if it is not related to food. Roughly half of greenhouse gas emissions are associated with some form of our food system. We cannot solve climate change without changing the way we produce and consume food. There's a great, I know you had a chance to listen to Michael Pollan earlier today, and in one of the videos that he has, he shows how a Big Mac actually contains 750 milliliters or 26 ounces of oil. That's what it takes to produce one Big Mac. We cannot continue to eat this way and think that we're going to resolve the issue of climate change. And compounding all of this is the issue of waste. Canada arguably wastes more food than any other nation on earth. $27 billion of waste in food every year. Globally, 1/3 of the food that is produced is wasted. And there's many reasons for that. and there's many places where it happens inside our food system. But it gives lie to this argument that we need to produce more and more food, and we need to have more and more technology and intensify our production and make it happen faster and bigger and better and more monocultures and more efficiency. We're actually throwing a third of it away. So actually what we need to do is foster a much more diversified kind of food system. It's rather astonishing to me, and I hope to you by the end of my talk, that Canada does not have a food policy. We have a foreign policy, we have a trade policy, we don't really have an environmental policy anymore, but we used to have an environmental policy, a health policy, an economic development policy, an agriculture policy. But they don't talk to each other. We don't have a national food strategy, something that would bring all of this together, something that is so important to all of us as Canadians, that we do every day. We don't have any way to bring these things together. So, for example, we have one government policy that's trying to promote rural development and the other one that's focusing on export markets. It's not really going to work out that way. Or one government body that's authorizing in a very slipshod manner all kinds of pesticides and chemical inputs into our agriculture that have been inadequately assessed for their safety. And then we have escalating healthcare costs related to the fact that we're eating so many toxins in our food. So if we had a national policy, we could begin to resolve some of these issues. And it's not like this has never been thought about before. In the 1970s, there was something called the People's Commission on Food, and it produced this wonderful report that you see up there on the left called The Land of Milk and Money. And if you go back and you read that report today, you will find that many of the issues which I'm talking about were already foreseen. And there was sort of a call to action, a call for the government to do something about it. Well, nothing happened. Understandably, the people who produced that report with no internet, no fax machines, no cell phones, can you imagine? Great report, traveled all across the country, but they were kind of exhausted when it was all finished in terms of actually lobbying the government to get something done. But there was a World Summit on food in 1996. And then you had the emergence of this document, Canada's Action Plan for Food Security. It also makes for very interesting reading today. It's not perfect, but principle number one in that policy was the human right to food, the very concept that was dismissed by our government in 2012 when the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food came and visited our country and talked about hunger, health, and agricultural problems, and was told that he was a meddling foreigner who really had no business here. And then in 2011, the group of organizations, a group of individuals, mostly individuals who work with Food Secure Canada and the many organizations that are part of Food Secure Canada, produced this report, Resetting the Table, a People's Food Policy for Canada. I encourage you all to take a look at it. It's available on our website in English and French. And it was produced by 3,500 people over a period of 3 years with fax machines and cell phones and wikis and all the things that make such a report easier to write. And it has a whole suite of recommendations about how we can begin to turn the ship around into a food system that would be more equitable, more healthy, and more sustainable. And this is not just an idea of Food Secure Canada. In fact, all of the organizations you see here, including all 5 political parties that sit in the House of Commons federally, all 5 political parties, as well as a number of more specialized organizations representing farmers, researchers, business, and so on, have all argued that we need a national food policy or a national food strategy. And yet, nothing has been done. There is a little bit of contradiction between what Canada is promoting internationally and what it's promoting domestically. As you can see on this slide, Canada says that we need improved governance and coordination and strategies for food security. Well, in Canada, there's a complete absence of public policy on the matter. Likewise, there's support for smallholder farmers and agroecology, more biodiverse ways of producing our food. Yet here in Canada, we focus uniquely on commodity and export markets. What can you do? What can we all do about this? Because I think that all of us have a personal food policy. Think about your day. Think about what you had for breakfast, what you had for lunch, how you normally eat. Perhaps you're a great cook. Perhaps you eat alone at your computer. Perhaps you eat fast, or slow, or cheap, or expensive, or organic, or processed. We all have a personal food policy, and we all eat. Yet our country does not have a policy that can bring this together. So there are little things that you can do as an individual, and I encourage you to do those things. Get to know a farmer. Think about where your food comes from. Don't only shop at the big stores. Cook and eat good meals with other people. I ask you to not only look at your food as a consumer, but to look at it as a citizen. Everywhere there are opportunities to get involved in the food movement, including right here at Concordia University, where the Concordia Food Coalition and others have done such fabulous work to start to question how institutions are getting their food and how we could leverage the markets that institutions have when they're feeding 20 or 30 or 50,000 students to do something that is better, more in keeping with the values of universities. So I just would like to encourage all of you to join this movement with me, whether it's at your university, in your workplace, in your home, with your children, with your parents. Let's talk about it, let's get involved, and let's make our own personal values more coherent with what we're advancing as a country. Thank you very much.